All right. Yechezeqel 8. And did a lot of reflection as I was going through this, and it really struck me that whereas the last lesson talked about empowerment, this talks a lot about our responsibility in application of that empowerment. So our last study of Yechezeqel, we concluded this overall idea concerning verse 10. Verse 10 said, "As for the likeness of their faces, they had the face of a man, they four had the face of a lion on the right side, and they four had the face of an ox on the left side, and they four also had the face of an eagle." So we came up with an overall idea that we are created with the capacity to think and to imagine just as Elohim thinks and imagines. The Adam was blessed by Elohim, and as such was to be, and still today can be, fruitful and multiply. We said not necessarily in the sense of procreation, but rather in the sense of growing spiritually in a relationship with Elohim and in the realm of humankind. This is because the Adam can think and imagine in a way that resembles the thought and the imagination of Elohim. We are created to be greater than fear, anxiety, dread, and depression. We are created to be greater than the darkness. It is our perception of the light that can lead us out of the night from the evening into the morning. We have the ability to have dominion over our choices. We have free will. We are both physical and spiritual beings, as described in the phrase, Yahuwah Elohim made earth and heaven. That Yahuwah Elohim took the physical earth to create our physical side and then blew into our nostrils the spiritual side. The Adam, you and I, was created for a purpose designed by Yahuwah Elohim. We have a choice that we can gather our emotional state into the presence of Yahuwah and be strengthened by him, or we can allow ourselves to suffer the violent emotions of the flesh. We talked about that those emotions, if we allow them to go astray, they become violent emotions because they literally tear our bodies up. They cause disease. They cause illness. We have been given the means to travel with Yahuwah Elohim and remain in his presence. It is our choice to do so. We can make teshuvah when we lose focus on being gathered to Yahuwah Elohim and fall to the violent emotions of the flesh. We can choose to be led by Yahushua over the Yardin, those things that drag us down, being led to Makom, the place within Elohim. Or we can be fearful of what lies ahead, believing the false report of the deceiver, and be turned away back to the wilderness. We can journey or travel with Yahuwah Elohim, or we can choose to be empowered by a relationship with Yahuwah Elohim. We can travel with Yahuwah Elohim, or we can again yield to the deception of the Satan and choose the carnal path in our existence. Now, we can choose to be empowered by a relationship with Yahuwah Elohim. I can do all things through Mashiach that gives me strength. When we are weak, Yahuwah is our strength. Or we can eat the dead things offered to us by the Satan, and as a result come under the judgment of the left hand. We can choose to be what we were created to be, or we can become something that we were never supposed to be. We were not created to be in a state of spiritual poverty. We were created to have dominion over it. We have a choice to turn towards Yahuwah Elohim, or to turn away and yield ourselves to the enticements of the Satan. So we got these ideas from verse 10, and we also looked at some ideas out of Bereshit that kind of supported the ideas that we were looking at in this verse. In this cohesive idea, we realize that we are truly empowered to live fully the lives that our Elohim has entrusted us to live. And I say entrusted us to live because we are responsible for the fruit that we bear and the strength and love that we bring into the lives of others. Loving Yahweh is the first part, but we must also observe and do the second commandment of the Torah, according to Yahshua, and truly consider its truth as it empowers us to live and to overcome. We love Yahweh Elohim with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, and with all of our strength when we love our neighbor as ourselves. And I mention this because as I was pondering the chariot and the throne, I realized that we are living in the presence of the throne of Yahweh now. We're living in the presence of his power and his authority. We're also living in the presence of his love and his favor, if we choose to be. What I realized was, and is, that we are traveling towards the white throne of judgment. And along the way, we can choose to cast off the chains of our carnally induced bondage by loving ourselves and then loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. We love Yahweh Elohim, and we strive in the best ways that we can to keep his Torah. But I realized that it is more than not eating a ham sandwich. It is putting Torah into motion by loving and caring deeply for others. And if we'll keep these thoughts in mind, we'll move into the 11th verse of Yechezeqel 1 that says, "Thus were their faces, and their wings were stretched upward. 2 wings of every one were joined one to another, and 2 covered their bodies." So we get this picture of a unique-looking creature with wings covering everything and stretching out and making a square, in a sense. So let's take a look at this verse, and see if we can make some kind of application, and as such make an adjustment to our lives as well. The first word in this verse is ufenechem, and it means their faces. In our last study, we considered this root, which is panim, to mean presence or in the presence of, from the root pana, that means to turn towards or to turn away from. But there's some definitions of this word that we didn't consider, and these are definitions that are not really widely used in describing this word, but they're still there. They still exist. Those words deal with our countenance, and they fall into a negative category, which this word panim also means anger, opposition, to battle, to fear, and heaviness. But this word panim also has positive category, or a positive meaning, that it means acceptance, it means favor, honor, prospect, purpose, and the ability to see. So this, in a sense, is how we steer this chariot. The negative turns us away from the presence of our Elohim, while the positive turns us into his direction. And if we'll keep that in mind, along with our initial thoughts, we take a rabbit trail. We're going to go to Bereshit 4, 3 through 7, that says, "And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering to Yahuwah. And Abel also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and of the fat from it. And Yahuwah had respect for Abel and to his offering. But to Cain and for his offerings he had no respect. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. And Yahuwah said, Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, shall it not be lifted up? And if you do not well, sin crouches at the door, and to you is its desire, but you can master it." So if we take a look at verses 3 and 4, we get simply this. We get out of life what we put into life. Cain doesn't put much thought or effort into what he presents, while Abel does. The result is that one yields promise while the other one does not. Our countenance is impacted by our actions, and our actions are simply choice. The negative side is in and of itself transgression, that if not corrected, stagnates into sin. And I think what I really meant to push forward in that is that for us to not put in the best effort or to keep to our negative pessimism is actually transgression, because it doesn't yield anything. So it stagnates and it turns to sin. Again, as we read in verse 7, it's a choice to sit in it or to take action to overcome it. Love is an emotion that we cannot simply sit in a chair and say, I'm going to feel love. And this is actually kind of a psychologically proven thing, that we can't sit in a chair and bring up the emotion of love. It requires a target for us to target that emotion towards something. We can't just sit there and feel love. Where on the other hand, we can sit and feel happy, we can sit and feel sad, but we cannot sit and simply feel love. It takes effort and action to feel love. And it is love that opens our mind to the possibilities to overcome our issues. It gives us motive to act. Now, with this in mind, let's continue with Yechezeqel. The next phrase for us to continue is, and their wings were stretched upwards, that begins with the word vechanfechem, that from its root, kanaf, we discovered the representation of both blessing and also the commandments of Yahweh Elohim. This means the wings, that it can mean, in the kaf, it can mean blessing, but in the wings, we understand that the wings, the tzitzit, are there to remind us of the commandments, the ordinances, and the statutes of Yahweh Elohim. So, it reminds us of these two things. These were stretched upward. The word for stretched is perudot, that from its root parad actually means to divide or to separate, as well as to disperse, to scatter, and to spread. So from this, consider this possibility for an idea that the way we act, what we do, the way we treat ourselves, and the way that we treat others is in one category, it's the blessings, while our devotion to Yahweh Elohim is in another category. They are separate in a sense, even though we perceive them to be one and the same. And that's a very important thing, that we have a tendency to perceive how we treat other people and our relationship with Yahweh Elohim as being in the same category. And if we go on, we're going to see that this can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. Where were we? So keep this in mind. Now, I once read a book, and I really did read a book, believe it or not, on how to make sales. And in this book said that we each affect the lives of a multitude of other people. And I couldn't remember exactly how many people it said that we actually affect in our daily life. I know it was a great amount of people, but we each affect the lives of a multitude of people. If this is true, then we can easily see how the way that we act, what we do, and the way we treat others is viewed by other people. If we say that we have a relationship with Yahweh Elohim while making Cain's efforts in the first category, then a mixed message is perceived by the lives that we affect. And it spreads, disperses, and scatters, and as each of these people affect the lives of a multitude of others, and those people affect a multitude more, then if our relationship with Yahweh Elohim and those that we affect is according to Cain's perspective, then what does that say about our relationship with Elohim from somebody else's point of view, we look like we're a hypocrite because we act one way while spouting out all this God stuff. Okay? You see where we're going with this? It can be a bad thing if people categorize them into one thing there. But where were we? If our relationship with Yahweh Elohim and those that we affect is according to Abel's efforts, then we present Echad, a oneness and unified idea that our actions are because we have a relationship with Yahweh Elohim. Earlier we were talking about a house that's divided. A house cannot be divided. If we say that we have a relationship with Yahweh Elohim, then we have to consider the way that Abel offered his sacrifice, that he offered the firstlings of the flock and even went as far as to prepare them so that he could also offer the fat. That took effort for him to dress these out so that he could offer it in the correct manner, as opposed to simply gathering up whatever he could gather and taking it in. Okay? So there's a difference in that. But we present Echad, a oneness and a unified idea that our actions are because we have a relationship with Yahweh Elohim. Does everybody understand where I'm getting? That in one way, if our actions are towards the negative direction, but we spout off all this relationship with Yahweh stuff, then it really turns people away from Elohim, or it can turn people away from Elohim, because you act like that and you say you have a relationship with your God. I don't want to have anything to do with that because this is the way you act. But if I treat people the way I want to be treated myself, I do unto others as I would have them do unto me, and I love my Elohim with all of my heart, with all of my soul, with all of my strength, then people can't say you're a hypocrite. Okay? So, this, however, leaves us with the balance of the phrase in that it went upward. The word for upward is mil me ale, that can mean upward, but actually means to ascend as well as to move forward. If we first consider the idea of ascend, then let's consider the words of Yahshua to Kepha, or Peter, at Matthew 16:19, that says, "And I will give you the keys of the realm of heaven, and whatsoever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Now, what we must recognize is that our idea not only affects the people that we deal with, but it also affects our relationship within the realm of Elohim. The keys to the realm of Elohim are also the keys to the chariot, and we can affect its ability to move forward based on the idea that we have developed so far. Okay? We act according to Cain, and we have a form of reverence, but the power is far removed, then that is bound in the realm of Elohim. This is what stays there. And this is what goes before that judgment throne, that white throne. And we have to keep that in mind, that also if we act according to Abel, and we maintain our relationship with Yahweh according to his word, that's also bound in the realm of Elohim. And it's recorded for when the chariot finally takes a pit stop, or a final stop in the garage underneath the white throne. Okay? So, the keys to the realm of heaven are also the keys to the chariot. We find its ability to move forward is based on this idea that we've just developed. Which brings us to a question. Finally, there's a question in there. Am I truly aware of what I say and do? Are those things that I say and do in conflict with my relationship with Yahweh Elohim, and as such, sending out a mixed message? Okay? It's an honest question. Because people watch what we do. You know, we say when you enter into a relationship, a true, real relationship with Elohim, you basically enter into a glass house. And people can see everything you do, and they judge everything that you do. As we have considered in the past, we are the only Bible some people will ever read. If we understand what we've just considered, then the balance of the verse will make sense. Two wings of every one were joined one to another, and two covered their bodies. Every blessing we put out or receive, and every commandment that we keep, affects others around us. The word for joined is choberot, that aside from joined means to be in fellowship with. The word before choberot is leish, meaning of every one, but if we consider that the lamed means instruction and guidance as well as to teach, and that ish means man and represents our physical worship as well as our physical actions, then we can consider that it is our physical worship and our physical actions that affect our fellowship. These actions are again joined to the next word, which is ish, which presents the idea that our actions and our worship affects the actions and the potential worship of others. We instruct, teach, guide others by what we do, say, and in our relationship with Yahuwah Elohim. As this is a vision from Yahuwah to Yechezeqel, who is in bondage, we also have to understand that we are also affecting the lives of others who may be in bondage to their situation or to some form of spiritual poverty. Elohim is encouraging Yechezeqel, and the name Yechezeqel means Elohim brings strength. So again, we must be conscious of whether we are acting like Cain or if we're acting like Abel. The final phrase, and two covered their bodies, is more of a direction than it is a statement. The word for two is ushetayim, from the root shenayim, that means two as an ordinal number. This word comes from the root shana, that means to change or to alter. From this we can consider that the second letter of the Aleph Beit is the Beit, that means house. Then we must look to see if it is our house that needs to be changed or altered. How many times well, guys, I shouldn't ask this question, but how many times does the furniture get rearranged in our house? If you live in my house, you're gonna fall over something about every other month, because the couches don't always seem to look right in the same place. But we're always looking. Is something out of place? Do I need to put something in place? Do I need to change the decor? So it's a kind of an interesting analogy. Now the word for covered is mechasot, from the root kasa, that means to be covered, but it also means to be protected. And a word very similar to kasa, the exact same consonants, is kiseh, that means throne. So are we covered and protected by the throne, the power and the authority of Yahuwah, who is our Elohim? The phrase in Hebrew is ushetayim mechasot et geviyote chena. Now the last word that I'm going to have to try to say again, geviyote chena, means a body, whether it's dead or alive. It comes from a distant root, but it is a root of this word that is ga'ah, that means to rise up, to grow, and to triumph. This is all done by and through the et, the aleph and the tav, that is the word of Yahuwah, who is Yahshua. We must look at to see if it is our house that needs to be changed or altered. We're covered and protected by the throne, the power, and the authority of Yahweh Elohim. We rise up to grow and to triumph through the Aleph and the Tav, that is the word of Yahweh, who is Yahshua. And this is as the concept that was made possible by the Son of Man, who made it possible for us to enter back into the relationship that Adam had with Elohim in the first place. Now, we will be both Cain and Abel throughout our lifetime. We're human. And if we're honest with each other, yes, we'll be both Cain and Abel throughout our lifetime. We can try and we can do the best we can to not get into the Cain habits, but it's going to happen eventually. We all do. You should see my office. You'd understand. But others will perceive what they perceive. We must continue moving forward and ascending, working on our house as we go, seeking the positives honestly and considering the negatives. We have the steering wheel and the keys to the chariot, as well as the roadmap that will eventually bring us safely before Yahweh Elohim's white throne. And the next page, it's just everything just flipped over to the next page for some reason, and yep, that's it. But as I was going through this, I couldn't help but reflect on myself and say, this, honestly, if I'm honest with each other, with myself, said, this is me. And in James talks about being double-minded. And there are times that we go back and forth. It's because, again, it's what Yahshua said. We worship, but at times we don't understand. And it's all a matter of growing. It's all a matter of picking out new furniture and changing the look of the house on the inside and putting a new coat of paint on the outside. That we have to become aware of how we are. We're empowered to think and imagine like Yahweh Elohim. So how can we apply that thought process and that imagination to develop ideas and then implement them that Elohim gave us, so that we can bear fruit and positively affect the lives that we do affect around us. So it's an interesting, for me, this whole study of Yechezeqel started out just as trying to answer why, if Yahweh Elohim is everywhere, why does he need a throne or a chariot? And as for me, as we've gone through it, I've come to realize that the chariot is there for me to go through the growth processes that we've been discussing and seeing in each one of these verses along the way, that when we finally do reach verse 28 in a couple of years, we will have established all these little ideas on what we can do to grow to be the best companion, not only for each other, but also to be the best companion for Elohim, because that's what we were created for. So, all that being said and done, many questions? Going once? Going twice?
Oh, one of them that I'm trying to remember back through our lessons and our time with you, whether or not we ever discussed or defined what loving our neighbor is. Is there...
Loving our neighbor as ourselves? Well, I think for me, the best definition of that falls into another definition, or another statement that was made, is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Because we have to love ourselves before we can love our neighbor. And to love my neighbor, I guess I set the guidelines on how I love myself, I think.